So growing up, the pastors that I had, they were all quite outdoorsy, but they had two nephews who were just the definition of what it means to be an outdoors person. And when they grew up, they were about 10 years older than I was. They grew up, they did guiding and all that sort of hunting, all that, the amazing stories. Like there's a story I heard of, they found eaglets in a nest. And they were on a little bit of an island somewhere in just kind of more north Saskatchewan. And the one person coming a little bit later had a video camera. Now remember, I'm old, so it wasn't this. We're talking this, right? Like with a VHS in there. They thought, oh, we saw some eaglets. Can I get that? Video camera goes up the tree, climbs up the tree to get great pictures of these eaglets while fending off the mom. And the greatest thing is some of these stories, when I heard them, were like, yeah, right. And there was video evidence of some crazy things that they would do in the middle of the wilderness because they just were, that's the way they were wired. Now, one of the stories I heard once, and I thought it was just quite amazing, is that obviously they did some wilderness survival stuff and all that, and they would teach it. And the one nephew was telling a story once where basically they would train a person how to walk relatively straight in the woods without the need of a compass. So using the surrounding areas, how can you know which way you're going and all that? So you have a group of people and he would situate them kind of throughout, I'm not sure how much the distance was. And then the idea was for a certain amount of distance, usually pretty good, I think about 1 kilometer if I remember correctly or so, I want you to walk as straight as you can by just using your surroundings. He would strategically put himself at an end, and almost inevitably, everyone would cross his path. And he'd have to guide them like, no, you're not going as straight as you think you were going. You were not going straight. And he'd have to correct them back to the path, give them a few little extra tidbits of knowledge of like, hey, this is what you're looking for. Here's maybe where you went off a little bit. And that's just something he used to do. And essentially, we talk about this fourth ingredient, healthy correction, it's that. It's no matter how long you've done something, how much growth and maturity in character, it's easy to just kind of get off the path. Now, hopefully, as you grow in that, you're getting off the path a whole lot less. But we can get off the path. And it's really good to have healthy correction. Healthy correction, the point isn't to focus how off the path you are. It's the recognition we're off the path and the guidance to get back on it. Now, I think when we talk about things like healthy correction or just correction, it can scare some of us because the truth is, I'm guessing everyone in this room has received some kind of correction. And I'm guessing you probably have received unhealthy correction at times. So much so that when someone maybe comes up to you and suggests, or maybe you think they might suggest some sort of correction, all your defenses go up because you've received unhealthy correction. And those emotions, we've talked about emotions that are in our brains that come just suddenly because it's connected to an event that happened maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Maybe it's several that were been unhealthily corrected. And instantly your defenses are up. And we kind of avoid that. Sometimes we've received so much unhealthy correction that we don't want to correct others because we know how it's helped, how it's made us feel, and how it's even knocked us down and not done really good. And so sometimes we just avoid it. Now, this is really why I started off with that story, is simply as this. No matter who we are, there are times in our life when we're going to need some healthy correction. In fact, how we grow is with healthy correction. That's why it's a part of these ingredients. We've talked about joy. We've talked about attachment love. We've talked about group identity. We need to talk about correction, healthy correction. Now, the other thing I think with healthy correction is the importance of kind of learning a little bit about it, what that looks like, how Jesus demonstrated it, is simply because sometimes we've received unhealthy correction with good intention. I think sometimes when we think of someone with unhealthy correction, we think of somebody who's got some nefarious, they're the bad guy, they're going to knock you down, when really they're just human too. And maybe they've had a lot of bad demonstrations of correction, and they're correcting you in the way that they knew how, the way that got results. Not transformation, but behavior modification. So sometimes even unhealthy correction can be done with the greatest of intentions. We want healthy correction. So this is kind of what it is. I think one of the best understandings of healthy correction is simply this. Sometimes what we need is an upgrade from the examples that we have as we go through things in life. In joy, when we talked about that, we talked about how we have 6 big emotions, things like fear, anger, despair, shame, disgust. Lost count. I don't know if I said 6, but at least there's 4 there. And what we want to do in a lot of maturity and health and character is the ability to stay in joy or return to joy when any one of those emotions are triggered. So what I mean by a healthy correction being an upgrade is because quite often in our family of origin, I really want to say this, as good as they can be, you might have had some parents that were great at returning to joy from disgust, but not so great at returning to joy from anger. Therefore, your brain, the right side of the brain, faster than cognitive thought, has registered how people return to anger, and it's not in a healthy way. Therefore, when we get older, what do? As much as we try not to, we tend to respond in that way. I have learned, as I got older, how often I will talk or say something and be and good and bad. I will say, oh, that was my dad. They have different approaches, my mom and dad, but there's so many times, I can see my mom, there's so many times, that's my dad. And I didn't sit there and like, you know what, how would my dad respond in this situation? Didn't have time to that. It's all of a sudden, it came out of my mouth. It can be a joke in the way he uses humor. I'll be like, oh, that's such my dad joke. And then I feel bad about that because my dad's got a weird sense of humor. Or just little things like just that. I've even found like the way I correct my children. My mom was loud. My dad was long. There are some times when my dad would he would have charts. He used PowerPoint before PowerPoint to here's all the things. He would break down all the stuff. I'd be like, can you just yell? You just say, Mom, that hurts my ears and it's not fun, but at least it's over in 2 minutes. We're on part 2 of a 13-week course on how I didn't cut the lawn right. It's just all of that sort of stuff. He was a lecturer. But we pick up the things from our parents. We may not realize that. We pick up the people from our social circles. Why healthy correction is important is because those things are defaults. So very much we do not necessarily, in any situation, like I said, all of a sudden say, oh, how would this person act in this way? You remember, is it 20 years ago? What would Jesus do? Quite often, have you ever noticed that you don't necessarily think that out? What would my dad do? What would this person do? You've just done it. The time you have that cognitive thought of what would Jesus do in my situation, you're just like, whew, that bus has left. And I got to catch up and make some fixes. And that's a good thing when we can really realize that. But that's healthy correction. It's upgrading what's been put in our head. It's upgrading our examples. It's upgrading this tape so the microphone doesn't fall all over the place. Yeah, I'm going to need that. Thank you. So, healthy correction is an upgrade. It's seeing better examples of what it is to return from some of these big emotions, how to return from them into joy, how to do it quicker. And what's really great and the wonderful thing is because even though we can be so, have a lot of the things that are set from our family of origin quite often, for good or for bad, like I don't want to sit there like, I think sometimes, I know I can hear it this way, you say I have all these bad examples, does that mean my family was bad? No, it just means they're human. Like I can look at my parents and I can say, yeah, I really like these things that they showed me, and these ways they showed me how to return from certain emotions. There were certain other ones like, yeah, they didn't do that so well. And I've got to learn that. And the wonderful thing about my parents, they're aware of it. So they're going to watch this and they're going to be like, what are you talking about? They're aware. They're aware. That's it. Probably a lot of us here probably have that. It's a good family, but we're human. So it's upgrading and updating our examples. Sometimes it's unlearning before we relearn. Because sometimes those examples can be so set in. It's not just like, like your family or your dad was not someone who returned from anger well. And then suddenly you have a good friend who in your life who does return from anger well. You've had a lot of years of learning this, and maybe you've only had a year or two of learning this. And it takes time to replace those examples and slowly over time. And so there might be times where healthy correction comes in the midst of that. The other thing too is sometimes the way we respond to things is because not just we didn't have great examples in certain areas, but sometimes we've had outright damaging ones. We have emotions that are attached to traumas. And the funny thing about trauma, especially when it gets to our emotions, is it doesn't know time. That emotion comes up, it triggers that emotion, it reminds you of something that happened 30 years ago. Your emotion and your brain aren't saying, but that was 30 years ago. Your emotion and your brain are saying, that's right now. And that example that needs to be upgraded sometimes comes right to the forefront, and then we respond to that thing that actually happened 30 years ago, to that similar trigger in the moment, in the present. But here's the thing. Why healthy correction is here is because without it, there is no growth. I think we'd like to stay with 3 ingredients. Joy, that sounds great. Love, I like that. Group identity, cool, who are we as a community? Healthy correction, let's go back to the other 3 because I don't want to know what I'm doing bad. I don't want to face with the fact that I've done something that's been hurtful. It makes me feel bad. I want to avoid things that make me feel bad. Well, you don't grow because of that. When we have a life of avoidance, we don't tend to grow. So, when we were talking about the last part of this series, group identity, this is kind of the list that we took over. By no means is this list exhaustive. But there's some of the stuff we thought were really important. 1, we are people who are compassionate. We are people who are kind. We are people who are gentle. We are people who are patient. We are people who are generous. We are people who love our enemies. We are people who forgive. We are people who are peacemakers. We are people who pray, because that's a way to talk to Jesus, whom we want to be like. And we are people who read our Bibles so that we can know Jesus deeper and better. Now, where healthy correction plays a wonderful thing in this is it's one thing, it's good that we have this list. But don't we want the example of what it means to be compassionate? especially in a given situation. What it means to be kind even as we're experiencing the emotion of anger. Because that can happen. How to be a peacemaker even though we are experiencing an emotion of fear. How do we love our enemies? Pick any emotion you want there. How do we love our enemies even when we're doing good? Sometimes we don't do these things very well. It's not because we lack a list. It's because we lack examples. Healthy correction is giving us the updated examples. Now let me talk. I think there's two ways in which healthy correction can work, through upgrading and updating. One, I'm going to call it more informal or indirect. And the other one, I'm going to call it just direct and clear. Jesus would use both of these. Many times, Jesus would be showing his disciples, not in a lecture, but sometimes just in life, a better example of what it means to be followers of God. They just kind of would see him doing it and say, hey, that's actually a lot better idea than I had. I'm sure we've had something like that. Like, have you ever had, maybe you worked with someone or you've done something who just, they knew this a little better, they've been doing it longer, and all of a sudden you watch them doing that thing, you're like, oh, that's way better than the way I was doing it. The healthy correction. They may not have said anything, but they demonstrated something to you, and your mind, your brain, even sometimes in cognitive, but even sometimes before cognitive thought goes in, you're like, hey, that's a little bit better way to do that. Well, that's what Jesus would have done. If we look at Luke chapter 11, it says, once Jesus was in a certain place praying. As he finished, one of his disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us to pray just as John taught his disciples. Jesus didn't say, hey, you're praying wrong. We probably could have. No, the disciples, probably not in this, just in an isolated observation, said, hey, you're praying differently than what we've known. You're praying differently than we see the religious leaders of our time doing. You're praying different than the way we were taught at any point in any schooling that we had. Can you give us correction in how to pray? Actually, in Matthew chapter 6, where we also learn about the Our Father, Jesus actually does it in a little more upright of kind of correction, where he's actually saying, hey, don't do it like the religious leaders that you're seeing right now. Hey, you've got bad example. Let me give you a better example. Let me update the example. That was a healthy correction. Let me update this. I want to show you how to pray. And that's essentially what he did. He updated and corrected in a better way to pray. And he gave him the Lord's Prayer, which is a simple prayer, which is quite easy to memorize, which wasn't necessarily as, look at me, which is the issue with the religious leader at the time. They're basically, the idea of their prayer was how they looked in front of other people and how amazing and how intelligent and how smart they were, how close to God they were. And he just like, hey, let's just bring that back down. I want to update your prayer. You can keep it simple. Then, there's more of a direct. And this is the one I want to camp out just a little bit longer. When it's the more direct thing, this is where you might have to, it can be a little more uncomfortable. The indirect is great. You just sort of see it. You might say, oh, here's a better way. Or, oh, hey, I saw Ron and how he returned from shame. That's a way better way than I've returned from shame. I need to lock that in. But then there's more of the direct. When it comes to more direct, it's really important that we go back to those first three ingredients. Though all these ingredients need to come together for a thriving community, the reason that there's an order is because before healthy correction can be done well, it needs a foundation of these. It needs a foundation of joy. If we're being corrected or we're correcting, we need to have basically a foundation, something that has happened before, that person is happy to be with me, or I've shown them that I am a person who's happy to be with them. Attachment love. That person is really truly invested in me, or I'm really truly invested in that person. Group identity. Because when it comes to correction, it's really bad when we say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. Have a nice day. That's not healthy correction. What healthy correction is, yes, the acknowledgement of maybe something that was wrong and off and bad, but the focus is on, I know that's not who you are. This is who you are. I think you just forgot. I'm inviting you back into community and identity. In John chapter 21, right at the end of John, after Jesus' resurrection, he's appeared to the disciples, I believe twice before, it's the third time. Peter and a few disciples are fishing, Sea of Galilee. Not any luck. Caught nothing. Jesus, even though they don't know it's him yet, is on the shore, calls out, how's it going? They're like, it's going terrible, haven't got a thing. He goes, put the net on the other side of the boat. And they do that. And they catch a lot of fish. It was really kind of cool. And this focus is on Peter right now. This is one of the first interactions, this is very much like one of the first interactions that Peter had with Jesus. In that Peter was fishing, not doing so good. And Jesus said, hey, just put your net on the other side of the boat. And so many fish that the net started to break. Well, that's what happens again. Instantly there's Peter. I know who this is. He's excited. He jumps off the boat. And it's kind of cool he's excited. Starting with verse 9, it said, when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. It's really important when we talk about charcoal fire here. John does not mention anywhere else this specific kind of fire except one other place, and that's when Peter would deny Jesus. He's setting the scene. Peter remembers one of those first and earliest encounters with Jesus because it's happening again. But now he's faced with a charcoal fire, reminding of his denial. And his denial is a big thing here. We talked about loving and loving attachment. Well, when we deny that, Peter was detaching himself from Jesus. So right at that point, he is out of character. He is out of group identity. He's detaching him. We are people who love one another. Attachment, love to one another. Verse 10, bring some fish that you all caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Pretty amazing. Now, come have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to the disciples since he'd been raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know that I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord. Peter said, you know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked this question a third time. Now, if we know the story, Peter would deny Jesus 3 times. And here's this succession of Jesus asking Peter, do you love me? 3 times. Peter replies, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus says, then feed my sheep. Well, we see Jesus here by seeing all those fish caught after a whole night of not catching a thing. By having them join him around the fire and having bread and fish. There's a lot of callbacks. Again, like I said, call back to when one of the first interactions Peter had with Jesus. Him providing food, breakfast, again, bread and fish, is a callback to the feeding of a multitude. Jesus is reestablishing joy and hesed. Reminding Peter, remember I called you. But then there's the facing of things. Now, yeah, Jesus does not come out and say, hey, remember when you denied me? And that's why I say I wouldn't say that this is a prescriptive form of correction, that you never have to mention the thing, you just have to set the scene for it, and it'll be figured out. I don't know if any of you have kids. This is what I have found when it comes to correcting them. There are moments where I don't have to say much. They're kind of there already. And I don't have to lay out the whole thing that they did wrong. They're kind of heavy on. They're kind of realizing that. It's less that's hey, we're all on the same page. Hey, let me guide you back. There's other times when you have to make it clear. Where you have to have a little bit more direct conversation in, hey, this is what you did wrong. See, that's the really key when it comes to unhealthy correction. Is unhealthy corrections focuses on the thing done wrong, spotlights the thing done wrong, and leaves the person in isolation. Healthy correction absolutely has the person face the wrong, but focuses on the return to community and identity. Unhealthy puts all the focus on the wrong done, but leaves the person in isolation. Healthy, still got to face it. I think sometimes that's the thing we don't do so well. We don't want to face it. We have to face it. Part of correction is sometimes, okay, yeah, I messed that up. Healthy correction, we don't stay there. It's the invite back. It's Jesus saying, do you love me? The denial was a detachment. Jesus was inviting him back to reattachment. Attachment love. And then inviting him community in such a way that he says, then feed my sheep. Come back in. Remember when I said, follow me? I'm still saying that. Remember when I invited you in community? I'm still inviting you into community. Talk about upgrading examples. Peter denied Jesus 3 times in front of people who had no authority. Fast forward to Acts chapter 4. Peter would stand firm in his attachment to Jesus in front of people with much authority, with the religious leaders of the time, people that could really do something about it, and did. He had a better understanding of what it is to be attached to someone. So we need to face it. Healthy correction is we need to face it. Unhealthy is when we put all the focus on the wrong, the bad behavior. We need to face it. That's uncomfortable by design. And next week we'll talk more about it's uncomfortable. There's no way around that. We shouldn't avoid it. It's uncomfortable. But we don't want to leave people in the discomfort. You face, you experience it. Healthy correction is leading people back into community, into joy, into attachment love, and group identity. We invite people back into community. Because truthfully, it's only when we face it, invite people back into community, that transformation truly happens. When we use unhealthy correction, at best we get behavioral modification. And I think we need to be a community that doesn't settle for behavioral modification because it's more damaging, even though everything looks great. The other one probably takes more work. There might be more bumps along the road. But you don't just get a different behavior, you get a transformed person. Whole. Healed. Truly living their best life, becoming more like Jesus. I'm going to just use this as a sort of the help us in a group identity, but we are the kind of people who accept healthy correction, knowing that correction can help form us into the image of Christ. What's really important, and we talk a little bit about in the video Ron and I did coming out, we need to be also people that do not accept toxic shame. We accept healthy correction. I put that very, very specifically. Not just correction, because there's not correction of any kind. We accept healthy correction. Even if the correction is right, we can't accept toxic correction. That make sense? You ever done that with your kids? I've had to apologize them. Okay, what I correcting you was the right thing. How I corrected you was really bad. We are people who accept healthy correction, knowing that correction can help form us into the image of Christ. I'm just going to put this slide up. And coming back to this group identity. And then I've added what we've talked a little about here, the idea we are people who accept healthy correction. And the reason I want to do is I just want to take a moment. And I want you to take time and just maybe 30 seconds, not long, maybe reflect on times when maybe we've used an unhealthy correction. Maybe it's toward our spouse, towards our kids, towards friends, maybe in our job. And I want you to reflect on who are we? We are people who? What I don't want you to do is beat yourself up. Maybe there's something that comes to mind. I don't want you to beat yourself up. I want you to remind you who you are. And even to reflect on how would a patient person have handled that situation? How would a peacemaker handle that situation? How could I have given a better, more healthy correction with kindness, with compassion, with forgiveness? Just take 30 seconds. Remind yourself who you are. And second, as we close, well, as I stop, we'll have communion after, I want to pray, because there's a good chance that if you're anything like me, you've received unhealthy correction, and it's left scars. And I want to take this moment, because we are going to, if you're watching our videos and our podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about this. Next week, we're going to talk about shame. And I know this is going to be weird. We're going to talk about healthy shame. I know that's kind of weird to phrase it that way in church, but we're going to tell you a little bit about that. But there's a good chance you, in unhealthy correction, have faced toxic shame. That video is coming out Thursday. And it's probably left scars. And I want to pray for you. Because for us to heal well and to correct healthily, we might need some healing in the ways we've been poorly corrected. And my guess is, even just saying this, there's a good chance maybe all of you or most of you can think of a story right pretty darn fast of where a person showed you shame and not an invitation, without any invitation back into loving attachment, joy, and community. Lord, we just, I lift up everyone here. If there is a certain time where they've experienced unhealthy correction, the story that comes to their mind, or stories, or ones that will come later on, I pray you show all of us where you were in that moment. That you share with us an invitation back into community. I pray for healing from the scars of that unhealthy correction. I pray that we all can start to even, sometimes that healing, I know, Lord, takes time, but we can start to feel joy, attachment, love, and community. That we can process that trauma healthily and well. Once again, Lord, thank you for healing. Thank you for your presence. Amen.